I sat at my sleek glass desk, the morning sunlight bouncing off the high-rise windows and painting the room gold. My fingers traced the edge of my silk blouse, smooth and deliberate, a small reminder that I had control over something. Finally, my phone buzzed beside me, vibrating against the polished surface. I picked it up, heart skipping when I saw the name flash across the screen, Mom. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since that awful day in the hospital. The memory always tried to sneak in, like a shadow at the edge of my carefully curated life. I could almost hear the antiseptic smell, the loneliness of the cold hospital bed, the hollow sound of my own heartbeat when they left me behind to catch a plane. Yet here I was, decades later, in a world they had no idea I'd conquered. A small smile tugged at my lips, ironic and quiet. I opened the message. It was vague, the kind of checking-in note people send when guilt scratches at their conscience. But the knot in my stomach tightened.
I knew why they were reaching out now.
I let out a slow breath, feeling the soft fabric of my blouse against my skin, the hum of the city below, the distant clatter of heels in the corridor. For a moment, I let myself feel the hurt again. The betrayal, the shock, the sting of being abandoned. Then, like a switch, I reminded myself I had survived. I had built my life. And now, they were the ones stepping into my world, uninvited and unaware that the girl they left behind was no longer vulnerable. I remember the hospital room like it was yesterday, though my mind tries to bury it beneath layers of success and comfort. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the antiseptic smell was sharp in my nose, clinging to my hair and skin. I was only 16, barely old enough to understand the gravity of what was happening. My mom and stepdad had promised they'd stay, that they'd take care of me. But when I woke from surgery, the bed beside me was empty, the room silent except for the beeping monitors and the occasional shuffle of nurses down the hallway. I called their room, then their cell phones, panic knotting my stomach. No answer. My voice trembled with each call, each failed attempt, until it finally hit me. I was completely alone. The betrayal was like a physical weight pressing into my chest. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the thin hospital gown, hands shaking, the rough fabric cutting against my skin. Every memory of them smiling at me, every promise, felt like a cruel lie. A nurse noticed my distress. She didn't scold or rush me along. She simply sat beside me, took my hand in hers and said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone decide your worth." It was such a small gesture, yet it planted something deep inside me, a seed of defiance, of hope. She reminded me that even when the people who are supposed to protect you fail, there's still someone who sees your value, someone who believes in your resilience. Later, wrapped in that hospital blanket, I found a crumpled note in my backpack from my grandmother, sent just that morning. "You're braver than you know. Stand tall, even if the world leaves you behind." I pressed it to my chest and made a silent promise. I would not let this abandonment define me. I would survive. I would grow. And someday, I would live a life they could never imagine. One built entirely by my own hands. That night, alone in the sterile room, I made my first decisive move toward independence. I started planning small steps, thinking about scholarships, part-time jobs, the tiniest ways to prove that leaving me behind hadn't broken me. In the quiet, I realized that abandonment could hurt, yes, but it could also ignite a fire. And mine had just begun to burn. After that night in the hospital, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never be powerless again. I started small, part-time jobs at local cafes, tutoring younger kids in math and English, anything that could give me independence. The world felt enormous, and I was tiny, but every dollar I earned, every step I took, was mine. No one could take it away. It wasn't easy. Some days, exhaustion made me question whether it was worth it. I'd come home from double shifts, collapse on the worn couch in my tiny apartment, and stare at the ceiling, imagining my mom and stepdad lounging on a beach somewhere while I scrambled to make ends meet. Anger simmered, but I channeled it. I studied late into the night, devoured books on business and finance, watched videos on entrepreneurship. I was building a foundation, that no one could shake. Then came the turning point. My mentor, Ms. Harper, noticed me one afternoon at a networking event. She was the kind of woman whose presence demanded attention, but her eyes softened when she saw potential. "You've got fire," she told me. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That fire she recognized was the same one I had hidden for so long, careful not to let the world see how vulnerable I had once been. She introduced me to contacts, guided me through early business decisions, and most importantly, believed in me even when I doubted myself. The early wins were small but monumental in my eyes. My first freelance client, who actually paid on time, the first profitable project that covered rent and groceries, the first moment I realized I could dream bigger. I kept meticulous records, not to show anyone, but as proof to myself that I was capable. Slowly, I scaled up, launching projects and building a reputation. I learned how to negotiate, how to handle rejection without crumbling, and how to transform every setback into a lesson. Through it all, I never broadcast my success to my family. I kept them in the dark, posting only neutral updates, masking the reality of the life I was building. There was a quiet thrill in it, a satisfaction that they had no idea what I had become. They had abandoned me once, and now, unknowingly, I was becoming the architect of a world they would eventually step into, unprepared. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I was financially independent, emotionally resilient, and professionally accomplished. My apartment overlooked the city skyline, the office space I rented smelled faintly of lavender, and my calendar was full of meetings I had orchestrated. I had created something entirely my own, a life that proved my worth was never dependent on anyone else. And every time I paused to look out that window, feeling the silk of my blouse against my skin, I allowed myself a quiet, private smile. They had left me behind. Yes, but I had turned that abandonment into power. The doorbell rang precisely at 10, sharp, echoing through my apartment like a bell of inevitability. I had debated for weeks whether I even wanted to see them. My mom and stepdad, the ones who had left me in a hospital bed, alone, while they packed sunscreen and swimsuits for a vacation. But curiosity and a strange sense of control had won. I knew they expected to see the struggling, dependent girl they thought they abandoned. I wanted to see their reactions when reality hit. I opened the door. Their eyes widened immediately, scanning the apartment, lingering on the view of the city's skyline framed by floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek furniture, the subtle but expensive touches I had painstakingly chosen. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Stepdad's jaw tightened, as if bracing for a blow that never came. "Wow," Mom finally whispered, her voice unsure, brittle. "This is nice." I stepped aside, letting them walk in, letting them absorb the details. Expensive abstract art adorned the walls, my office desk gleamed with minimalism and precision, and bookshelves held a careful mix of business strategy, classic literature, and personal development guides. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with a faint hint of lavender from the candles I always kept burning. Everything screamed success, independence, and intention, things they had never expected me to possess. I poured coffee for the three of us, my hands steady, my smile calm, almost serene. I gestured toward the skyline. "I assume you want to talk," I said softly, letting the tension linger. They nodded, but no words came. Their silence was awkward, charged, full of unsaid apologies. "So, let me fill you in," I continued, my voice even but powerful. "You left me in a hospital when I was 16. You went on a vacation while I recovered alone. I was scared, confused, and hurt, but I survived. I didn't just survive. I built a life. I have my own company now with clients across the country. I'm financially independent. I own this apartment, my office, and everything in between. And yes, I did call CPS back then. They investigated, and it changed a lot of things, but I didn't let it define me. I defined myself." Their faces went pale. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. Stepdad's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting around as if looking for someone else to blame. We didn't know," Mom stammered, guilt written in every line on her face. I leaned against my desk, folding my hands calmly. Now you do. This is the life you never thought I could have, the woman you left behind. And I am not that scared, lonely girl anymore. I'm the one in control. I let that hang in the air. The weight of my words filled the room, heavier than any apology they could offer. And in that moment, I realized how much power had shifted. They were stunned. They had walked into my world, uninvited, expecting pity or weakness. Instead, they met resilience, strength, and undeniable success, the product of my own hard work, persistence, and refusal to stay broken. I watched them shift uncomfortably in the chairs, their eyes darting between the skyline, the artwork, and me. For the first time in our lives, the balance of power had changed. I could feel it, steady and unshakable, coursing through every fiber of my being. They had once dictated my life by leaving me behind. Now, I dictated the terms of any presence they could have in it. I'm not saying I won't let you back in. I began carefully, my voice soft but firm. But if you want to be part of my life, there are conditions. This isn't about punishment. It's about respect and change. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the weight of my words settle. First, I said, you need to acknowledge what you did. No excuses, no deflections. The day you left me in that hospital changed everything, and it needs to be recognized openly. Mom's throat tightened, and she swallowed hard. Stepdad's gaze dropped to the floor, shame flickering across his face. Second, I continued, I will not tolerate toxic behavior. You cannot belittle, manipulate, or dismiss me or anyone else in my life. I've built boundaries, and they are not negotiable. I watched them nod, slowly, as the seriousness of the moment sank in. Third, I added, softer this time, if you want a place in my life, you need to pursue your own growth. Stop clinging to patterns that hurt yourselves and others. Seek therapy, find meaningful work, do the hard emotional work you've avoided. If you can't, that's okay, but it means keeping your distance. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the city. I could see the weight of understanding settling on them, the first real cracks in the wall of denial they had built for decades. I am giving you a chance to be part of my world, I said finally, but on my terms. This is not control, it's accountability. It's the respect I never received when I needed it most. And understand this. I care about you, but I will not compromise my peace, my success, or my boundaries for anyone. That girl you left behind is gone. She's been replaced with a woman who knows her worth and won't settle for less. Mom's eyes glistened, Stepdad's jaw relaxed slightly, and I could feel the first flickers of genuine remorse and recognition. I realized that this moment wasn't just about me asserting power, it was about reclaiming my story, rewriting it so that their actions no longer held me hostage. I was no longer the abandoned girl, I was the architect of my life. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel both compassion and strength simultaneously. I could help, yes, but only if they were willing to meet me halfway. The power had shifted, and I was ready to enforce it with both love and unwavering clarity. Weeks passed after our confrontation, and slowly, subtly, I began to notice change. Mom started attending therapy, her nervous calls now replaced with thoughtful conversations. Stepdad began volunteering at a local community center, a small but meaningful step toward understanding responsibility and empathy. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't immediate, but it was real. I watched them grow from the sidelines, not out of power, but out of cautious hope. I felt a warmth I hadn't expected, a reminder that even broken relationships could heal if the right boundaries were respected. I allowed myself gratitude for the lessons they inadvertently taught me, the resilience, the independence, the unshakable self-worth that had been forged in the quiet, lonely moments of my teenage hospital bed. Every morning, I still touched the crumpled note from my grandmother, the one she'd sent the day I was abandoned. You're braver than you know. Stand tall, even if the world leaves you behind. I've carried it with me through years of struggle and triumph. Now, it sits framed on my desk, a quiet emblem of strength and guidance. I glance at it each day, a reminder that the fire inside me, once ignited by betrayal, had become the beacon of my life. I reflect on my journey often, the nights I cried into pillows, the long hours of study and work, the moments of doubt and fear that I turned into fuel. I see the woman I've become, resilient, confident, and unapologetically in control of her life. And as I sip my morning coffee, silk blouse brushing against my wrist, I realize that every hardship, every abandonment, every lonely hospital night was a step toward this version of me. They are still learning, still growing, but I am steady, grounded, and at peace. I have cultivated relationships that honor mutual respect and love, and I no longer carry the weight of their neglect on my shoulders. I've reclaimed my narrative, my success, and my emotional freedom. And so I stand tall, not just because I survived, but because I transformed survival into power, abandonment into achievement, and pain into grace. The girl they left behind is gone. What remains is a woman who knows her worth, sets her boundaries, and moves forward with unwavering strength. And if anyone ever doubts her, all they have to do is look around. Her life, her accomplishments, and her heart tell the story more clearly than words ever could. Bottom of form.